Okay, I believe we are live. Yeah, it says we're live. Awesome. All right, everybody. My name is David Popoidin. I am the admin of the Faith and Reason, a Conversation Facebook discussion group where we try to have sort of congenial conversations about topics of faith, philosophy, modern politics, and whatever we want to talk about, really. But today we're here to talk about near-death experiences and what our perspectives are on that. We have with us the two moderators in my group. We have Stephen. How do you pronounce your last name, sir?
Weigel.
Weigel. Stephen Weigel, who is our token theist for the night. And he is a proponent of, not to go into too much what your position is, but more or less that you are the proponent that near-death experiences somehow correspond or point towards something of supernatural origins.
Sure.
And then on our other side here, we have Dave Edgar, who is my other mod. He is an atheist, and I'm guessing he is going to be taking a pretty strong anti-position on that, just from what I know of him. Is that about right, David?
Yeah, and in a strange turn of events, I just shaved my goatee and facial hair off. So actually, Stephen, representing the God side of things, has the goatee, and me being the evil one, I'm clean shaven. So you guys will need to figure that one out on your own.
It's an interesting role reversal.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
How and then with us tonight, we have Tyler. Tyler, what's your last name? If you want to give it to us. Say it again.
Davis.
Oh, okay. And he's described himself as an agnostic, and I don't know what his feelings are on the topic. So, well, who wants to go first?
Well, Mr. Weigel is in the pro side of things, so I think we should let him start off, and then we can rebut.
Okay.
We're not here to beat up on you. Okay, I'm not even gonna really but personally because
I said rebut, not beat up.
right, exactly.
I'm looking forward to fighting.
Give me what your ideas are on near-death experiences, and and what that indicates to you, essentially.
Okay. Now, a lot of my ideas on this aren't original, but in my investigation of near-death experiences, I find it extremely hard to find academic material, things that aren't personal accounts, or other kinds of writings on it. I did find a really good article in The Atlantic about it, which was one of the more skeptical articles. From my understanding, what is agreed upon is that near-death experience usually happens when someone is in a comatose state or in some kind of strange state where they're close to unconscious. And near-death experiences often, they often involve certain tropes. One of them being like people existing outside of the body. Another being that people will visit something that's like either a good place in the afterlife or a bad place in the afterlife. So someplace like heaven or someplace like hell. But the near-death experience doesn't necessarily correspond to the Christian experience. It corresponds to whatever religion the person is familiar with and or grew up with. So as I understand it, if atheists have near-death experiences, they see visions of Christianity. And I think go to either heaven or hell. I actually haven't checked the percentages. The near-death experience website, as new agey as it looks,
is that the one in France?
I believe so. Okay. Hold on, I can't find where it is. But they have a really nice list of percentages of statistics from the near-death experiences they've collected. The most striking statistic being that none of the people they've counted who have a near-death experience, none of them have seen like an evil figure, in contrast to a good one or a strongly spiritual one. Like many people say they saw God or something like God. I think something like 68%. See, I wish I was better at navigating this website here. It's not very helpful. But like none of the people who witnessed Christian events, none of them saw Satan, or nobody saw like a devil figure. They only saw like a God figure. The article in The Atlantic that I talk about, I think it talks about some of the more skeptical viewpoints and why they're so skeptical. And I think it's a good overview of the topic. This article is just called "The Science of Near-Death Experiences: Empirically Investigating Brushes with the Afterlife."
How old is, if I can interject for a second, how old is the article? Just out of
curiosity. Let me look. Oh, it's 2015, so not too bad.
So yeah, so it's fairly recent. Okay.
Yeah. The accounts, or the accounts that people tell from near-death experiences where, like, you know, they leave their body and they're floating away from everybody else who's looking around them, unfortunately doesn't prove anything for a skeptic, because, you know, obviously if you just hear what people are saying about you as you're floating away, you could just be right there. The Atlantic mentions one very peculiar story that was the closest to having evidence of a near-death experiencer seeing something anecdotal that corresponded to something in reality. Let me see. I recall, I'm trying to find it, but I recall that it was someone who had a near-death experience and saw like a certain color of tennis shoe in an upstairs closet in a certain place.
I've heard of this myself not too long ago. That someone basically they reported having sort of an out-of-body experience. Give you a break from talking for a second. An out-of-body experience where they like went up and like flew around the outside of this hospital that they were in, and on it they saw like a sneaker or a tennis shoe or something that was like stuck on a windowsill outside of the building, like on one of the windowsills.
Right.
And when this person woke up, they reported basically like where they saw it, and they went down and they found where the shoe is, essentially. Yeah. And like, what does that mean, kind of thing. So
yeah,
it's something that theoretically they wouldn't have been able to know, and that's like verifiable. And so they like to use these out-of-body experiences to try to verify, okay, something real did happen, and we can confirm that you know these things that you shouldn't be able to know. There are a couple incidents like that. I think I read the same article from the Atlantic that you read, Stephen. They name another one where a woman, they did a medical operation where they essentially shut her brain and her body off to repair an aneurysm. And she was able to tell them afterwards, she was able to recall snatches of conversation between the doctors. She knew the music they'd been listening to while they'd been operating. And so for a while, she was like a poster child for this notion that somehow, even when your physical body is completely turned off, there's something about you that can go outside of you maybe and see the real world and interact with it somehow. So that's kind of the argument. There's something beyond the material. As far as I know, that's the basic statement. And some people deduce that it entails some sort of religious or spiritual view. Other people conclude it just tells us we don't understand the human mind as well as we thought we did.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I guess there also seems like there's a distinguishment there between having a near-death experience where someone is, their body is in the process of dying or they're kind of hanging on by a thread, versus someone having an out-of-body experience, which I've heard described sort of in similar ways. Like if you're going through surgery and you're in some kind of induced coma or something like that, it's not necessarily that like you're about to die, like on your way to heaven or hell kind of thing, if that's the trope, versus, you know, you're in a very weird sort of brain state and this induces some sort of vision or experience of being outside of your own body that's not necessarily related to death and dying necessarily, I guess. If that, would you, Steve, would you sort of categorize that all as sort of the same kind of thing we're talking about here? Is there a significant difference for you?
I think the biggest difference is that in a near-death experience, usually the person is transformed forever and never views life the same way again.
Yeah. Well, that is one thing to note. The article that we both read talks about this. This idea of the out-of-body experience is regularly reported as being a part of the broader near-death experience. It often begins with sort of an out-of-body experience, floating away from yourself. And then these people who report this are transported to somewhere else. Often it seems like it could be heaven, but some people go to hell. It's very interesting. I think I read 23% of people who have near-death experiences report that it's very unpleasant. And
the ones that went to hell.
Yeah, they must have. So, But yeah, the out-of-body experience is kind of part and parcel with the near-death experience, according to these people who believe that.
Interesting. David,
Yes.
you've been
Yes.
quiet for a moment.
Yes, I have.
What are your thoughts, sir?
I think that none of it is conclusive in any way, shape, or form, and I think that there's a lot of biological components to the whole thing. The retellings and the reports of the stories are very vague. For example, the account of the shoe on the ledge, that was actually Harborview Hospital here in in Pacific Northwest. It was in Seattle.
Okay.
But the lady who reported it was named Kimberly Clark, and Kimberly was a nurse or staff at the hospital. The person who had the out-of-body experience, her name was Maria.
Mm-hmm.
And upon investigation, nobody could find any record of her or find out where she lived or be able to talk to her directly. So all we have is Kimberly's kind of account of this. And, so we don't have any verification from the source. We don't have any way to test the source. We don't have any way to verify the story or anything like that. So that to me is very flimsy. The body is really amazing, and there's a lot of things that our bodies and our brains do that we're not 100% sure about yet. Have any of you guys ever broken a bone or really badly sprained an ankle or something like that?
I don't know. I don't think I have.
You never been badly injured?
I've broken my nose a couple of times, but
right. So typically with broken bones, what you find is similar physiological responses. So you have constricting of the blood vessels. You have endorphin shot into the nervous system, so that it's dulling pain. You have a heightened heart rate because the body thinks it's being threatened, so that you can get out and you can run, or you can fight if you need to. There's all these physiological responses that across all sorts of cultures happen exactly the same way, and the reason for that is because physiologically we are all within hundreds of percentage points identical to each other. I mean, if you compare the likeness of different humans to other species out there, we are nearly identical as far as our genetic makeup. So it's not beyond the pale to consider that these near-death experiences, which when you really look at the reports, there's some sort of trauma, there's some sort of really lowered brain functionality, whether that's brought on by chemicals or it's brought on by accident. You have now I just saw you wipe your nose, Stephen, and I lost my train of thought. No, the other one. But anyway, so you have these physiological similarities that are all in response to the body trying to deal with the fact that it thinks it's dying. We go through this every night. Every single night we go through it. In fact, when you're lying there asleep and just kind of watch it tonight as you're falling asleep, your body will twitch because your brain thinks you're dying when you fall asleep.
Really?
Yeah, and so it's trying.
I wish my brain figured that out every night.
Yeah, but I mean, it does. So your body will twitch because it's like sending impulses to make sure you're not dead.
I've actually noticed that I will twitch weirdly sometimes in a situation like that.
Yeah.
But I thought I was just weird.
And no, that's just a common thing. And then we lose consciousness to the point that we don't register our own existences. And then we dream. So, wow. I mean, and so there's all this stuff in there, and I'm not a neurosurgeon or anything like that. So I'm speaking from an armchair position.
I think I should mention something. You mentioned dreams, and I would wholeheartedly agree that NDEs are very like dreams, specifically because they, the sense of time is different, much different. And people experience time dilation, and they say they don't know how long they've been there, like, feels like an eternity or what have you. So I always wonder if that's if that somehow feels different than actually having a dream and or what that's like.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's not repeatable, right? So
Right.
we can't induce the same states and then everybody responds exactly the same way, which makes that very difficult. It actually makes it a more difficult science to study than actual psychology, where we know people react differently to different situations. The really big one was Eben Alexander from Harvard. I don't know if you guys came across that one.
Yeah, actually, I have seen that. Yeah.
Right. So his big thing was his brain was totally shut off, and he wasn't, there was no way he could construct new memories by using his brain. And so his mind had to exist separately from his brain. But when they talked to his doctor, and he kind of represents this. It's in I think it's called The Proof of God.
Yeah,
sounds right.
It might be Proof of Heaven, but yeah, it's close to that.
Yeah, Proof of Heaven, Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife. So one of the critiques of his book is that he represents the reason for going into this altered brain state or going into this near-death experience was a result of going into a coma because he had contracted E. coli. But what really happened was he went to the hospital to be treated for E. coli, and they put him into a chemically induced coma. And so they used drugs to alter his brain state. And his doctor, who was interviewed later, said, no, his brain was functioning. He was just extremely delusional.
Yeah, Alexander's claims are based on his own studies of his medical charts. And the dude is a neurosurgeon. He's a pretty sharp dude, but he hasn't published his findings in any sort of peer-reviewed journal. It's just his own interpretation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And Scientific American, or Scientific American, which is the peer-reviewed journal for science in the United States, rebuts his story pretty heavily.
Yeah. For sure.
My thought, if I could jump in real quick, because the thing I sort of asked you, Stephen, at the beginning is, what was the date of the article? Because you talked about, well, this is sort of a study on these NDEs. And I guess my immediate thought was, because the little bit of research, and I've just done a little bit of looking, is that, well, it's really hard to study something like this, what the brain acts like when a person is dying and what's actually being produced by your consciousness versus, is it delusion versus is it something spiritual? That there isn't a lot of, there's not a lot of peer-reviewed research because those are extremely hard conditions to recreate. So most of it seems like it comes back to the experiential. And it sounds like in the case of this neuroscientist or whoever this fellow was, who was going over his own charts, and they wrote a book about it. Apparently, it makes the skeptic go, "Well, this guy had an experience, and maybe he wants to attribute it to something like that." But it seems like a stretch. And then when you add to that, the issue is that some people have these experiences and they're genuine and they maintain that they're genuine, whereas other people have come out, like this heaven is for real, and the little kid and thought he went to heaven and met whoever, and then it comes out months or a year or two later that
it was several years later.
Several years later. Yeah, in one case it was several years later that basically that it was a hoax, that people in his family, people in his church, they wanted him to talk about this because it was going to bring people closer to
You have a dog, right, David?
Do what?
You have a dog, right? Okay, your room's not just moving or something weird.
Yeah. Well, it's the naughty pine. It comes alive.
Oh man.
It's proof of the paranormal.
It's a cursed room. No, I have a dog who is very much the same color as the walls.
Is that why you got him?
Just makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah. Well, right. So, what I'm getting to is that, why I believe people have legitimate experiences, what those correspond to is the question. But I guess the problem for me in terms of trying to verify it is, how do you stack those up against the ones that are more or less been proven to be hoaxes, in terms of the validity? Because all you have is stories of the experiential, like we don't even know how to filter out who's making stuff up, essentially.
Yeah.
And we know for a fact
it's just, it becomes harder and harder to verify because of stuff like this.
Right. I think another thing to bring up is even if you imagine, do a thought experiment. Imagine someone has an NDE and it is 100% verifiable. You know, they were in a hospital, so there were machines measuring their brain activity and things like that. Let's say this were to occur and they came back and said, I had this experience. Here's what it was like. I think I met God. Even if you had an instance like that and you knew it was totally true, how far could you take that? Like, what could you use that to prove? What could you use that to suggest was true?
Well, you know, it's a really interesting point to bring up. I was watching the Atheist Experience this last weekend, and they actually had somebody calling up talking about NDEs. And Matt Dillahunty said, you know, if everybody who had a near-death experience saw a dragon, would that mean dragons are real? And the guy said, well, of course not. He said, so, I mean, then what is it?
Well, I don't know. I'd like to butt in there and point out, at least it proves that there's something about a dragon that might be weirdly universal.
But, I mean, you know...
that doesn't mean the dragon is real, but
well, right,
it does mean that everybody sees a dragon when they die. I mean, that's weird.
Right. Okay. but what if that's just cultural, right? And like you were noting, that people see cultural iconography when they die. Death is very much the centerpiece of religion, right? Because that's all what it's concerned about. Where do you go when you die? You know, because I mean, honestly, if people weren't concerned with where they went when they died, like religion would not
see a lot of different
behavior, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, when people are when the body is afraid that it's dying and it's trying to comfort you, it's trying to compensate for all these things that's happening to it, and the body compensates in incredible ways. You know, definitely comforting iconology is going to present itself, and that I understand that seems a little far-fetched. Like, you know, how does the brain know what's going to calm you down and things like that? Well, you know, pregnant women crave dirt when they're pregnant because of the nutrients that are in dirt that they're not getting through their other food. How does the body know that there's nutrients in the dirt, right? You know, because it's remembering something from, you know, 20, 30 years prior.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was pickles, but maybe it's
pickles, dirt, strange cravings, strange mixes of food. Yeah, it all has to do with the nutrients that they need.
Yeah. Okay, so that would be your answer to why near-death experiences, when they converge on something, why that's not strange and why the brain produces the same behavior every time. So, not
the same behavior every time, but what we are
right, but like why would different near-death experiences not be more different and just simply act, you know, like dreams or something?
Well, yeah, and I think it's the same. I think it's the same psychology, or I don't know if maybe psychology is the right word, but the same process of events that makes alien abduction stories similar. I mean, because alien abduction stories are almost 100% similar, and we're not convinced that those are real.
Right. Yeah, they are very similar. Yeah.
That's because we know, I think for a fact, that a lot of people are lying. They're picking up on the tropes of popular abduction stories and spitting them back out. Or maybe if they're not stable people, maybe they're imagining a story they've heard before.
But, you know, it's really interesting because we give more credence to this concept of near-death experiences, which, one, people haven't died. That's why it's called a near-death experience. Yeah. 2, their brains are in an altered state. 3, there's obviously people, like David was saying, that are lying or trying to get some sort of attention. I mean, but somebody has an NDE and we go, oh my gosh, God, you know.
Yeah, I feel you. I think it's also worth mentioning that not everyone who's near death has an NDE. If there were a place we all go to after we die, or we start going there when we're about to die, you would expect it to be more common and not less common, but it's actually extremely uncommon.
Wouldn't it be interesting if some people did go someplace when they die and some people didn't?
I think that's what the guy said when he invented Christianity.
That was good.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of that's one of those things, like that's that kind of postmodern idea of, everybody's right. Wherever you think you're going to go when you die, that's where you go. And
right, and that's actually the popular mantra, like on the NDE website, where they've formulated a worldview from all of the accounts.
Right. And that's
where,
the
like,
danger. That's the danger of forming a worldview on things that you don't have any evidence for.
Although I think,
would that be like an aggregate of experiences? Like, well, some people had this happen, and some people had this happen, and some people had this happen. So what must happen is all of these things. Like it's, like you go to a big amusement park and people have just gone to different rides or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
it's actually kind of like that. It's like there are like several options of things that can happen. Like God telling a person X is in like 60% of them, and you know what? I need to find that.
Yeah,
page.
that's what's interesting. There often is a common, supposedly it's an identifiable sequence of events. There are like 7 tropes that often appear in these things, with at least some degree of regularity. But I want to go back to what I said earlier, which is even if you had a 100% confirmed near-death experience where someone went to heaven and met God, what could you use that to prove? And I'm not persuaded you could use that to verifiably prove anything beyond what we already know, which is just that we don't understand the human mind and the human brain as well as we would like to.
Yeah, and it seems to be a very clumsy way of trying to, trying to show oneself to the world. Like, hey, I exist, so I'm going to wait until you're almost dead. I'm going to give you this kind of hazy vision of what you think you may have seen, because all of this stuff is coming in. And then afterwards, after you wake up, you try to process what all that was and try to put it into a coherent story, just like you do with your dreams.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no indication that your dreams are actually what you remember your dreams to be. There's a whole theory of thought out there that says that the dreams are just images, and then we put the storyline to them later on when we remember them.
That's very interesting. That could totally be true. I mean, in a sense, life is just a series of images that we put a storyline to. I think a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah, but I think there's, I think there's more cohesiveness when you're talking about life,
because in a sense that's true, but maybe not as much as we'd like to think there is. Humans can rationalize themselves into believing just about anything.
Mm. Yeah, you're kind of talking about the 5-minute universe, where we have there's no 100% conclusive evidence that anything that's happened before actually happened, or it being inserted into a narrative. So I don't like to go there because that's just
that seems like sort of an extreme skepticism. Of induction.
You start to get into some weird esotericism and.
Guys, give me 1 second. I got my dog out. She's gonna start whining through this thing.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah. So this kind of concept of because memories are fairly coherent. When I get done here, I can relate the account of what happened here, and it should be with some very minor variation. It should be similar to your account.
Yeah, you would think so. Yeah, hopefully.
So,
unless I lie about everything.
Well, yeah, unless you're a theist.
Yeah, theist.
That was cold. That was.
I like how the theist went right to lying. So,
isn't that funny?
But yeah, I don't find. I think of all the different ways a being of infinite knowledge and power could demonstrate himself to people. NDEs are just really not a good way to do it.
Right.
I agree with that. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I don't know if people interpret NDEs as God, like proving himself to them, like some miracle that they've asked for, but that's a very poor interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what started this whole thing. There was.
But there is a difference between people saying NDEs suggest that there's like life beyond this life, and someone who says God gave me this NDE so that I could come back and tell you all that he's real.
Right,
but that's what distinction.
Well, but of the most popular NDE reports that we have, like when I went to heaven or whatever that kid's story was,
Yeah.
and then Dr. Alexander's recount. These are all statements of not only is there an afterlife, but there is a Christian afterlife.
Yeah, and that goes back to my point. I think it's almost impossible to use an NDE to support a specifically Christian theology. There's just not enough there to lead you.
And people who have NDEs who don't believe in Christianity see other religious icons instead, but they play similar roles.
It seems to lead more toward a sort of like universalism or something like that than to a specific faith.
Universal salvation,
which is a problem. I think that's a problem for any specific faith that tries to claim an NDE as evident, because NDEs could be used to prove all faiths or just a specific universalism that most fundamentalist faiths would not be able to agree on.
I'm not really sure that gives evidence closer towards a universalism, like a universal spirit or universal something, because everyone's having subjective experiences, and it's their own, it's their own candy land, basically, when they get to the end, that it's, whatever their beliefs, whatever their worldview happens to be is supported there. Like and they'll talk about, and I've heard sort of accounts of someone, say like a Muslim who had a near-death experience or some kind of spiritual revelation, and it's of Jesus, and that showed them that they need to convert to Christianity. Well, that only ever happens after they've heard about Christianity. They've only after they've heard about, which in Islam they already know who Jesus is and what the differences are probably, but it comes down to subjective experience, and that's what gets represented out in this ether land of I'm dying, my brain's shutting down, I'm having an experience that is definitely neurological on one end and maybe spiritual on the other end, but it always comes back to this is based on things that are already in my head. There's nothing new, there's nothing not of me that's going to occur when I'm having you giving up on the
they're just heavy and my head hates them.
You're starting to give you a headache. Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm done.
It doesn't matter. We were having technical issues before. We were trying all kinds of different things to try and get trying to get sound on Stephen here. Because there's no way we could beat up on him and he'd just sit there silent. That wouldn't be fun.
Exactly.
Yeah. But anyway,
and another thing that kind of comes to mind is imagine the terror that you must be in when you're going through a process like that. I mean, I back about 6 or 7 years ago, I had to have surgery, and they put me under, and I was asleep. I was completely out. I had no idea. Like I have no memory of anything other than count down from 100, and I woke up in recovery.
Yep.
But when I woke up fighting, because my body was aware of the trauma that I had been in and was freaked out. And so, I mean, your mind is processing all of this information that you're only really barely aware of at any given time. And so, I mean, it really is not far-fetched that some process in your brain is, sending out the information because the boat is sinking. And so we're just trying to play soothing music.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think in general, a lot of explanations that are more rooted in our knowledge of anatomy and neuroscience can usually be offered to at least explain away a lot of near-death experiences. I want to go back to something else. We talked about the idea of God using an NDE to try to alert you to his existence. And
sure.
This brings me to a thought experiment I like to do on theists, which is to ask if there's
sorry.
To ask if there's any miracle that God could possibly do for you that would 100% prove your specific system of theism, with no other possible explanations being admissible. And it's really hard to think of a miracle that God could do. Like, God could turn water into wine in front of you, but that wouldn't necessarily confirm anything. God could raise Jesus from the dead, but even that isn't necessarily a confirmation of any of Jesus's claims.
I think
if
the
you were to
thing to
encounter
do would be if God were to show up and take you through an extremely long, like 3-week tour of all of history and theology and explain why all of it was true and perform miracles along the way.
Okay, sure, that would be pretty amazing. But
Yeah.
how would you prove divinity at that point? Like, I mean, how would you be able to separate from, because like Arthur C. Clarke, you know, the famous adage, you know, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yep.
You know, how do we know that this is actually God and not just a time traveler who is capable of doing things that appear to us to be miracles?
Right. It might just
Right,
be
and that is an appeal to an extremely unlikely explanation. But you have to try to weigh what's more unlikely: the idea that I'm a brain in a vat being experimented on by like an insane scientist, or the idea that God exists and He created me and the Bible is true.
Neither one is likely.
I'm not confident. I'm not confident in picking between one of those. They both seem unbelievably unlikely to me.
Yeah, and see, the brain in the vat thing comes out a lot. Like, how do you know you're not a brain in a vat?
Yep.
I have no reason to suspect that I'm a brain in a vat.
No, and you're right. And I wasn't bringing that up to suggest. I wasn't bringing that up to suggest skepticism.
Right, let's not go there.
For
another night, we can get into solipsism. I don't mind.
Yeah, but the point that I'm trying to make is that we have to, like David Hume said, that the wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. And so we have to have a reason to think that this is possible. I mean, because somebody could come and take you on an accelerated tour of history from start to finish. He could tell you all the stuff, but there would be no way to prove that he was the guy that made it all happen.
Yeah,
and there would be no way to prove it to anyone else if it was just your own experience.
What if you got to witness creation again?
But what's that?
What if you just got to witness creation again?
But I mean,
again,
I mean, I've been to planetariums where they show renditions of how space began and how the universe expanded.
Yeah,
but I don't think that Neil deGrasse Tyson is God.
I don't know about
That's a great show, by the way.
But if I were a caveman, or if I were even Newton, that would blow me away. As smart as Newton was, that would just floor you.
Yeah, I do think that there would be a difference between that, though, and having the cosmos unfold in front of you in some magical way. But yeah, we couldn't
right. Like,
technology.
Yes or no? Let's say that you did get to see that. Let's say that hypothetically, God took you on a tour and showed you an instant replay of Him creating the universe.
Like that Adam Sandler movie with the remote.
Sure, that would definitely.
And God's Christopher Walken. It never like sat with me.
I've never but no. I would say that experience might inspire personal conviction in you, but why would it inspire personal conviction in anyone else?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If you just told them, hey, I had this experience, God showed me all this stuff, or God did this miracle for me, you might be totally justified in believing from then on this is the truth. But no one else would have any reason to, just because you told them it happened.
Well, unless they know you really well and know that you're not the kind of person to present it in an ad hoc way. But that's not really good evidence.
Right,
but even then, I would have
to
have faith in you. You know what I mean? My faith in God would depend on my faith in you.
Even if my mom told me that.
Yeah, and you, Stephen, if you had this experience, if I had this experience, and I went to Him, and God, He did the parting of the clouds Monty Python thing, and kind of gave me what for, and made it completely unambiguous that He exists, and whatever version of theology that follows, from that is actually the true one, then I would have enough, evidence to be convinced. That would be sufficient for me to be justified, to be rationally justified in belief. But that's not going to cut it for anybody else. He would have to do,
and nor should it.
Nor should it. Would have to do that for everybody. Which God, if God being omnipotent, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. I wouldn't think. But that doesn't happen for whatever reason.
But if He doesn't,
it could be that God has reasons sufficient unto itself for not doing that, or it could be that I don't know.
I can't
Or God
imagine.
doesn't exist. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not
There
going.
could be a strange saga that we don't know about involving God, like perhaps he's in another universe incomprehensible to us, and he's only allowed to use a certain amount of his power or something silly like that.
There's
Find a
lots
million.
of conjectural things.
Well,
you can put in
then
there.
he's not omnipotent, is he?
Whoa.
Who doesn't allow God to use his power?
I wouldn't know.
I think
You know
I
what
think
I mean? You know, I mean, so that's a whole other can of worms that just.
It's a big one, yeah.
This goes
So I
back
guess,
to oh shit. Sorry.
Okay, you go first.
The paradoxes of God's supposed omnipotence are usually based on misinterpretations of what omnipotence means. If you go back to medieval theology, they define pretty clearly what omnipotence means and doesn't mean. And they essentially resolved questions like, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it?
Mm-hmm.
Or can God like command himself to stop being God? Things like that. But again, that's contingent on if you accept a medieval theologian's take on God.
Well, I think the most telling part of that is that prior to that, God never said, "Okay, let me tell you what I mean by omnipotent." You know what I mean?
No.
I am willing to accept that God has all logically sufficient power, right? Like I'm willing to accept that concept of if God exists, then He has all power that's logically available to Him.
Yep.
God could not create a rock that He couldn't lift, because that would be a paradox and would not be logically possible.
Yeah.
But I think that it's very interesting that the more we maneuver into, well, how do you account for this? How do you account for that? How do you account for this? The omni gets less omni as we're moving along. The omni goes to, well, what if he's in another universe and he's only capable of using his power so many times, and he has to, I mean, for one thing, it's ridiculous to believe that we are completely alone in the universe. It just the amount of the universe and the math behind it, it just makes it silly to think that. So the idea that he only is able to be here with us at any given time and doesn't have enough power to like administer to the other worlds that maybe are populated by people or things. But it goes back to, what do we have reason to believe?
Right. And it also goes back to, are you committing the mistake that Occam warns you against? Are you multiplying your entities unnecessarily? If you're devising all these complex systems and rules for God to follow, and saying, well, he's an interdimensional being who can do this but can't do this for these, there's no way that works. That goes against Occam's razor. It goes against common sense. You have to have a more systematic, logical explanation for God and why he does or doesn't do the things he does. Some people claim to have that. I don't, and that's why I'm agnostic.
Interesting.
Do you believe in God?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
I genuinely do not know.
Do you accept that God exists?
No, I don't know whether he does.
Welcome to atheism.
He's leading. I was about to say he's about to lead.
I don't know.
Congratulations, you're an atheist.
I don't know if I agree with your sophistry there. Look. I don't rule out that a being like God could exist. I don't rule out but I just don't know for certain that he does, and I'm not confident for certain that he doesn't. So, I genuinely don't know.
Have you accepted the claim that God exists?
No, I don't assent to that claim.
You can try me. I do for now.
Well, no, I'm just making a point that there's this kind of misconception as to what agnosticism and atheism is. And agnosticism, gnosis means knowledge, right? So if you take diagnosis, right, from doctors, you've got two, right? Di means two, gnosis means to know, and a means to not know, right? So if you have a diagnosis, you have two people who don't know what they're talking about, which should give you a lot of confidence when you go to the doctor. But
I thought you would have gone on to say that it has to do something with like the two witnesses system. That's in the Bible. Two people knowing something, a diagnosis.
This is sort of an internal struggle with people who consider themselves like non-believers, essentially. Atheism versus agnosticism. That there's a debate whether or not really agnosticism is even a thing. Again, me trying not to label or telling someone else what their beliefs are.
I think
I more or less agree with what Dave is saying. Is like if someone asks you, "Do you believe in God?" If you can't answer yes, then you're basically an atheist at this point.
Right.
But other people view it different ways, and it's like I don't
for
want
me,
to define terms for somebody else, but that's sticks in some people's craw too, and so we have this little back and forth, which has nothing to do with the near-death experiences. By the way, we've gone a little bit off.
That's true.
But,
as we're wont to do.
yeah, as we're wont to do. This happens all the time. I've done a podcast in the past where the feature is to argue about some political issue while drinking whiskey. By the end of the show, we're never talking about what it is we're supposed to be talking about. And we did it sober, so I feel like maybe it's more just human nature rather than copious amounts.
I did suggest
hard liquor. Yeah, you did suggest a beer, and we can certainly do that in the future. I certainly don't have a problem imbibing while we do these things. At some future
friends
point.
don't let friends stream and drink and stream.
Drink and stream. One can follow the other.
Number one.
What's that?
Yep.
What'd you say, Stephen?
Oh, I said that definitely sounds like it has something to do with going number one.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's
I think it's an important thing to talk about because I think it's important to establish that, like, as an atheist, I don't discount the concept that there is life after death, right?
Right. Yeah.
I just don't have any reason to believe that that's true. And until I'm given a good reason to believe that that's true, I don't see any reason to accept the claim.
Yeah, I suppose I see you on that. I make the distinction just because I'm genuinely not certain that there is no God.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's right to say that I believe there is no God. Rather, I don't believe that there is a God.
Right, and that's new atheism.
Yeah, and it's conceivable. I mean, maybe I'm misusing the term, but all it means is that I don't know either way. Oh,
point of order. No, it's cool. It's cool. I do want to have this conversation. I really want to have this conversation. But I want to keep these topics relatively concise, so nobody has to listen to us meander on for 3 hours. I know we can just sit here and talk,
right?
All kinds of topics. But I want to close this one out. We want to schedule one for next time to talk about like atheism versus agnosticism, and what that means. Knowledge claims versus belief and all that stuff. We can get into that. But I think for now, if we want to just share what our closing thoughts are, maybe on the topic at hand. And we made Stephen go first, so I would ask that Stephen go last, so he gets the final say in all of this. I think that is only fair. De minimis is as a measure of fairness here. So I can let you guys go. I can offer my own little piece, what have you, and then we can close out with Stephen. I'll stop the broadcast, and we can continue talking if we want, or what have you. Sound good?
Okay. Yeah, sounds fine.
All right. Tyler, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think the brief, concise breakdown I would give, again, there's a lot of things I don't know. I don't discount the possibility of the miraculous, but I don't think you can use even a valid example of a miracle to prove the specific God that you believe in. I think there are a lot of different interpretations for the unknown. Some of it is that we just don't know the answers. Some of it is that, maybe there's a life after death. Who knows? I just don't think you can use it to prove any one given thing. And as a result, I don't see the need to change my belief system based on NDEs right now.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I haven't encountered anything that makes me think that NDEs are an indication of the afterlife. And then beyond that, I haven't encountered anything that makes me think that there is an afterlife. So while I'm not closed off to the concept, I'm willing to be proven wrong. I just don't see any good reason to accept the claim.
Okay. And I guess my minor point, I guess, would be in closing that if NDEs do some at least correspond to something real, that there is an experience of some future state after death that the person experiencing this has some kind of encounter, and if in at least some of the cases it is real, my biggest problem is we have no way of verifying which one of these are true.
Yep.
and which one are false, because some have been demonstrated to be false, and there are necessarily experiential and subjective, where it's, you know, the Muslim person has the Muslim idea of the afterlife, and the Christian has the Christian idea of the afterlife, and the Hindu has the, wait, that's reincarnation. I don't even know where that goes.
It's actually remarkably in line with the worldview presented on the NDE website.
Yeah, that's
right. We'll let you. Like I said, I'll let you. You get to put a bow on this. But for me, there's no way to separate who is having a straight delusion versus who's experienced something real, when we have no way to check for that, essentially. And I would have to wait until we have some kind of methodology in place that allows us to do that before I can give it further consideration. And that's my final. So, Stephen, to you.
Okay, so it's become pretty clear from this conversation that NDEs probably can't be used to support the notion of an afterlife in a reliable way. But from what we do have, we know that there's a strange consensus, and we know that that's distinct and can lead to conclusions, for example, that the NDE website puts up there. I will say at the very least that the worldview they present is, you know, unless you think you would get bored of eternity, it's a very comforting thing, because it postulates that all people can get to where God is when they are spiritually mature enough to do so, and people who experience NDEs are always in a state of joy and comfort. As Dave mentioned the other time, we were talking about how the brain is not in a healthy state. So maybe that can change things a little bit, but to me it would certainly seem extremely odd that the people who didn't go to hell, or the people who did go to heaven, or even some people who went to hell and then were able to go to heaven because God told them that they were allowed to do so, that they came away with an experience of joy and came away with a changed experience. And I do think that if we choose to believe in such things that may seem ridiculous because they have a consensus, we should always keep in mind that this is something that can easily be disproven, and that we do not have to be beholden to it. We're flexible to change, and we are screening for people who are potentially ad hoc, but still understand that this might indicate something of value.
Okay. Great. Thank you,
My best
guys,
defense
for coming out.
Yes.
We have goose egg for viewers. That's okay.
That's all right.
Because I'm going to share this out. I'm going to shamelessly self-promote everywhere I can. I encourage you guys to do as well, if we want to get some listeners and more people participating, because I like having these discussions that are congenial and not set up as like strict debates where we have to have a fight about it or get in each other's face. Because again, the whole purpose behind the group, it's so unproductive. What would you say?
Your 20 seconds are up.
My 20 seconds are up. That's it.
You get no rebuttal, no time.
No rebuttal. Yeah. Well, but anyway, so thank you guys for coming out. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the broadcast now, and we can continue to chat if you want. But
yeah,
okay.
I did kind of want to address